Giddy up, ride up, cowboy! Oh, I forgot. You're broken. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Welcome back, you over 7,000 beautiful beasts. First and foremost, I want to say Feliz Año Nuevo, or Happy New Year. I hope that 2025 has been going swimmingly for you. Now, it has been a couple months since my last video, and people have been hitting me up, man, Brewmaster, when you're going to come out with your next video? Have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? I know a lot of drama's going on with Hasbro. I know that I've been radio silent for a while, kiddies.
But don't you worry. Daddy's home.
And I come bearing gifts because last time I got into 5e, the D20 system, its ins and outs, and you can find that video here. However, I've been, looking more into other systems because after the DMG has come out, reading over it, I still find certain parts of the game to be lacking. D&D often, to me, feels hard to have a narrative in. I mean, it's got all of these fancy mechanics for combat, sure, but what about the narrative itself outside of fighting? And this leads to a system where frontal assault is often the only real answer to a conflict, if you get what I mean. And so, like so many others, after all of the mishaps of Hasbro and the sort of design misgivings of 5e, lots of players have begun to branch out and try other games, myself included. And in my experimenting with other games, looking for other ways to tell these stories, I came across what may be an unbespoken masterpiece, which is, my friends, none other than the Dishonored RPG. Now, D&D 5e was my first ever TTRPG, no shame in admitting that. And I'll always have love for it, and I'll always play it. And in fact, I actually play it every week. But this may be one of those rare situations where, just size just truly doesn't matter. Because look at this little book. And it has managed to excite me in ways that D&D has not in years. Now, this isn't a perfect system, and we're going to get into that later on in the video, but the design here addresses a lot of the issues that the community has when it comes to 5e. The design principles that are in here, too, could be taken and formatted for a D20 system with little effort. So perhaps some of these concepts could be taken by WotC if they ever do come out with a truly new edition. But in the meantime, you can definitely take the concepts here, and when you're doing your own homebrew, apply them to your game for a much stronger design, flatly put. Now, at some point in this review, I am going to have to deep dive the maths, of course. So as usual, bring your thinking caps and a hot cup of joe while you're at it. Because today we're going to be comparing and contrasting the pros and cons of 5e to the Dishonored 2D20 system.
Corvo, if only there was someone else I trusted to send, so that you could remain near. But there is no one else. And the Spy Master was right to insist that I send you.
The Dishonored gaming franchise is nothing short of a masterpiece, and this is derivative of a video game in which you play Corvo, a man who's been framed for murdering the Empress and has to murder his way through, or without violence, remove his enemies, and fight his way back across the Empire and back to the throne, saving his daughter in the process. The freedom involved with offering the player multiple paths, multiple choices, lots of powers and options at their fingertips is one that I apply to my very own game design, and something that I'm happy to say did survive and did translate from the video games directly into the TTRPG. So without further ado, let's get into it. And if these sort of gaming deep dives get you excited too, and you like to see this kind of content in the future, then please let the algorithm know. It's only a quick click for you, a little like, a subscribe perhaps, but it has a huge impact on the back end for our channel's performance. So if and only if you like what you see, then please do consider throwing us that digital tip. Remember, like, subscribe, and of course, stay caffeinated. So without further ado, let's get straight into character creation, because it is through that I can really start breaking down the system and how it works, and then we'll be able to list out the core systems and compare those to that of 5e. So everyone knows that in D&D, the makeup of your character basically consists of your primary class, your spells, your ability scores, followed by your proficiencies, and really important in 2024 E, your background. In Dishonored, there are no classes. But they do have something close called Archetypes, which awards some numerical bonuses to our skills and our styles, and I'll get into those later. Skills and styles are Dishonored's version of ability scores, essentially. Now, each archetype also awards 2 talents, which is this game's version of feats, and we'll get into those later as well. When it comes to stats, every character has the same skills and styles to put points into. Simply put, your skills are what you do, and your style is how you do it. And that leads me to the core mechanic of this game, which is the GM presents an obstacle. Let's say there's a bouncer outside a club and he wants to stop you from coming in. The game master asks you, what do you do? The player then describes what their character does, like in any RPG, except that in this game, the player must then decide which of their styles and skills best describe the action that they're trying to take. So you then take those, the skill, the style, you add those values together, which give us our target number, or our TN. That is this game's version of a DC. You then throw 2 d20s, not 1 d20, but 2 d20s, and try to roll both dice, hopefully both dice, equal to or under your target number. So in this example, if we decided to sucker punch the guard in the face and try to use the confusion from that to walk into the club, I would definitely say that that's probably fighting boldly, though the player could argue for fighting swiftly. But if you decided to lie your way in, depending on what the character actually says, that could be talking swiftly or could be talking cleverly. Whatever method the player chooses determines the difficulty of the test, and by this mechanic, Dishonored literally turns your player actions, so the actions of your character rather, into mechanics. Now let's look at our focuses. And these are basically what proficiencies are in D&D. So basically, if you had a skill proficiency in D&D, that's what a focus is in this game. Except that instead of always giving you the same bonus, which in D&D would be your proficiency bonus, they instead provide the chance of you gaining an extra success on your dice. Successes? What is this? Yes. So in this system, each test requires you to roll a certain number of successes, referred to as a difficulty. So a difficulty 2 requires 2 successes. A difficulty 5 requires 5 successes. The base difficulty of either 0 to 5 is chosen by the GM. You then roll your 2d20s against your own target number, adding up your skill and your style, and every die that equals your target number or is less than your target number counts as 1 success. Also, if your roll is equal to or lower than your focus, in addition to being equal to or lower than your target number, then it counts as 2 successes. So if we fight boldly with our rapier and roll a 6, that counts as 1 success, whereas a roll of 4, which is equal to my fencing focus, that would count as 2 successes. So the archetype that you choose is going to give you a bonus to your skills and your styles to start with, a numerical bonus. It also gives you 2 talents, or essentially in this game's perks. So the archetype will heavily influence the way your character starts off. It also gives you suggestions for which focuses you should choose. But note, these are only suggestions. You're actually free to choose any focus from the list and even make up your own focuses with your GM's approval, which really opens up character customization, which I like a lot. And next, as an optional mechanic, they're going to also provide us some outlooks. Now these function more or less like archetypes. They're basically the same, except that these are made to reflect your character's mindset or their outlook on life. These also add numeric bonuses and give you additional talents. So I'd recommend saving these. Actually, as a GM, I'd recommend saving these for smaller groups, or if you're just doing a one-off or a one-shot and you just want to be crazy powerful, then go ahead and throw them in. But now this is where we get to our bread and butter of this system. It's delicious. Believe me when I tell you, the truths system. And there are 2 kinds of truths in this game: personal truths and your general truths. Now your character starts with 2 personal truths. You can also give them a flaw, which acts as a truth as well. These truths are words, statements, or phrases that determine a definite about your character. These truths get at the core of what makes your character unique to this world and are immutable. You can't change these personal truths outside of intense narrative moments or as a result of a major plot point. Or in D&D terms, you might look at these as your character's background, sort of. However, here, truths are so much more potent. So unlike 2014 D&D, truths actually will come into play like every single session, whereas in 2014 they basically never come into play. But unlike 2024 D&D, truths are not restrictive in the same way the backgrounds are, and they don't lock you out of any character builds, which is great because that's going to lead us straight into our next thing, which is leveling up. In this game, you will gain XP like in any other game, but in this game, XP is a currency that you spend to increase your stats, and every stat has its own cost of XP to increase it. You can increase your skill, your style, or your focus by one. You can also buy a talent, including any talent from any other archetype or outlook. And you can even add a new focus, including making one up. Leveling in this game is extremely modular, meaning that you can build almost any character that you can imagine within, of course, the fantasy of this darkly magical steampunk setting. Now, my big love of this system is that players generate their own XP. Yes, you heard that right. The book lists certain ways that if the players want to gain experience for their characters, they can go ahead and do that. And by doing these things in the session, go ahead and look at it on your screen. Doing these things in the session, they can generate their own XP. And I love how these options all encourage the narrative. So GMs, your job in this system is not really to give out XP, except for when the players finish some main dangerous plot point. In that case, you would award anywhere between 1 to 3 XP and not much more than that. And so that's really it. Those are all of the most important mechanics for any player. And from the outset, just reading character creation, you can already see how much more flexible this game is than D&D. And it doesn't even offer you, a bunch of different racial options. It doesn't offer a bunch of different spells or anything like that. It's all about getting into the trenches and really figuring out within the narrative what your character is going to shine at, what they're going to excel at. And the book even lets you make up your own stuff so that you can better tailor it to your character. I find this game to be very intuitive, especially with my D&D players who play this game with me. They're like, oh, it's just such a breath of fresh air. It's very intuitive. You describe your character's actions, and that literally determines the target number. And then truths can be invoked to make those goals easier or make them harder to accomplish. And that is exactly what we're about to get into now. Because as we've already seen in character creation, this game has a lot of similar concepts to D&D. They're just basically given different words and sort of implemented in slightly different ways. But that's all surface stuff. Let's kind of look under the hood now, so we can see how this game is functionally different from D&D. And we have to start with the most notable thing about this game, and it's the fact that it uses 2d20s for its checks instead of 1d20. So you roll 2d20s against the target number, and you try to roll low. Whereas in D&D, you roll 1d20, you add your modifiers, you try to roll high. That's because 2d20 is a dice pool system, and the math works completely differently from D&D. So you're gonna need your thinking caps for this one. Let's get started. So the goal of any dice system is going to be to create some sort of system of fair resolution when there is something that has a chance of failure that the players want to try to accomplish. The goal here in this particular system, the way that we resolve the checks, is to try to score enough successes, rolling against your own target number, which is determined by your skill, your style, added together. The GM determines the base difficulty, or how many successes you actually need to roll in order to succeed. But then truths on top of that can also alter this value to make it either higher or lower. They can make things more difficult or easier, in other words. Now, this is the beauty of truths. Players get personal truths, right? But then truths can also be put on anything, on the environment, or any characters in a scene. Let's say a character wanted to shoot a difficult shot, and I say it's a difficulty of 3 as the GM. I may also say, you know what, it's windy outside, and if windy is one of the truths that is on my scene, I can just invoke that, and boop, the difficulty goes up +1. Now, instead of a difficulty 3 to shoot, it's a windy day. Now it's a difficulty 4 for them to shoot. The player could then decide, you know what, difficulty 4 is too high. I'm going to creep closer to increase my chances of hitting. I'll say, excellent, go ahead and make a stealth check. That is going to be me asking them to move quietly in this game. They decide to sneak forward to get a better vantage point. But you know what? They decide too to invoke the windy truth. They say, well, you know what? It's harder for them to hear me sneaking up, isn't it? Because it's windy. And just like that, the players can literally turn around and use the exact same truths for their benefit. Note, Players shouldn't know the personal truths of NPCs unless it's prudent, but environmental truths, things that are evident for anybody to see, those should be available, and you might want to even like write them out on a card and put them on the table for everybody to see during the session or during that scene. And so the literal math of the 2d20 curve, how the truths affect that and stuff, that I'm going to cover toward the end of the video, because I want to get into my next favorite mechanic, which is what makes this feel so much like a collaborative game, is the use of chaos and momentum. The chaos and momentum system is amazing, and chaos is actually integral to the video games, where violent actions result in more volatile reactions from the game world over time. Committing violent or objectively evil acts creates chaos, which the game master can spend in a number of creative ways listed on your screen. Now, the flip side of chaos is momentum, and this is used in almost the exact same ways, but it's used only by the players. So the players actually share a pool of momentum, and it can't get higher than 6. Momentum is gained by rolling more successes than is required. So for example, if you only needed 1 success, but you rolled 4, guess what? You got 3 momentum. Momentum is very important as a resource because it's even necessary to activate some of the talents or feats that you get from your archetype. So you always want to basically keep this on hand. And in this game, killing is easy and getting killed is easy. So when it comes to fighting, you're probably going to be generating a lot of chaos in the action scenes. Momentum will help you counteract that. But eventually, momentum will run out. You have all of these creative ways that you can use it, which I've shown you on your screen, but eventually you will not have enough momentum. And when that happens and your rolls go bad and you don't have any momentum to cover you, that's when you use your void point. The use of avoid points sort of symbolizes the outsider working on your behalf. And the outsider is the sort of dark god of magic in this universe. Void points and how many you have directly correlate to how much interest the outsider has in you or how much favor you have with him. And they can be used in a variety of ways, but the most powerful way is that they can add a beneficial aspect to any scene, in which ways they function basically exactly like a fate point from the fate system, or like plot points from D&D if you use that optional rule. And I highly recommend using that optional rule. Now, I do want to get into the pillars of this game, because that's really where we're going to see it start to differ the most from D&D. So let's start with these pillars with what everybody really wants to know about, right? The combat and the magic. Because that's really what we're playing these games for, right? You know, to shoot shit, to stab shit. And this game's got shooting and stabbing aplenty. I love this system. It is so brutal, scary, and it rewards proper preparation because it's so brutal and scary. It's definitely for a more cinematic experience than raw D&D. And so I've actually homebrewed my own set of combat rules to add a little bit of crunch to it for players who like that, who might be coming from a crunchier system or even coming from like Conan or something, and they want something a little bit more that they can sink their teeth into as a more experienced gamer. I actually made a system for that, and I'll be sharing pieces of that system with my patrons. So if you are interested in seeing some of my own homebrew for this game, please do support the Patreon. But in this particular system, I think that its brutality comes from its lack of crunch, which is actually something that I've preserved in my homebrew. It's still going to be very brutal, but it's got a little bit more tactical options for advanced gamers. But when it comes to just playing it right out of the box, it's smooth, it's streamlined. And the biggest thing, I think, is the fact that you only get 4 to 8 hit points, which are called stress in this game. And you die when you reach 0 HP. There are no death saves in this game. Weapons deal flat values and don't deal any damage dice. But if we just take a look at what these weapons do, we got the sword here. It's flat damage. You know, if it's excellent, it does 4 damage. Rifle does 5 damage. And so just looking at these, if you've only got 4 or 5 HP, 1 hit can kill you. Quite literally, 1 hit can kill you. Secondly, you always roll to defend yourself in this game. Whenever there's any combat whatsoever, it's always a contest. The only way that it's not is if it's a sneak attack, in which case you roll against a static difficulty given to you by the game master. But once you get into that fight, everybody's rolling for everything. If somebody's trying to shoot at you, you're rolling to dodge. If somebody's trying to stab you, you are rolling to parry, to deflect, to get out of the way. And when you attack, of course, you're going to make checks just like in D&D. Whoever wins the exchange is the person who rolls the most successes versus their own target numbers. And it is brutal because the offense always wins a tie, which means in order to properly defend yourself, you always have to roll one higher than the enemy, which is tough. And don't get me started on counterattacks in this game, which are brutal. If a character misses an attack in this game, the target can retaliate by spending 2 momentum or 2 chaos, automatically landing a counterattack and doing their weapons damage to the enemy's health. So here's an example from one of my games. A guard runs up, tries to attack a player, rolls 1 success. The player also rolls 1 success to defend themselves. The tie goes to the offense. They deal 3 damage directly to the player character. The player character retaliates. It's now their turn. They use their action to attack, but they miss. The defense rolls 1 success. They roll 0 successes. I spend 2 chaos to automatically counterattack. That's 3 more points of damage to them. They're dead. And because every single die roll can be literally the end of the fight for you, there is never a dull moment. There's never a down moment. Every player is alert the entire combat, whether it's their turn or not, because even when it's on the enemy's turn, you're still rolling dice. During combat, any character can also spend 2 points of momentum or chaos as a result of a successful check to place a truth on an enemy or in an environment. You're fighting a dangerous swordsman, you might want to start off the fight by attempting a disarm, because if you roll, they roll to defend. Even on a tie, you succeed. Now, if you want to spend 2 momentum, you can. You can spend that 2 momentum to add the disarmed truth to your opponent. Their sword goes flying away, and that enemy must now spend their action, make a successful check against a difficulty of 2 to get their item back. Otherwise, all of the damage that they deal for that fight is going to be unarmed damage. Now, here's the cool thing. Once the players have that disarmed truth on the enemy, they can then invoke that same truth to make it easier to keep attacking, saying, well, I have a sword. He doesn't. So they can invoke that then to decrease the difficulty of their rolls by 1, making it easier to hit him. And that's just one condition. Truths against enemies can be anything from blinded, choking, stunned, staggered, off balance, on the back foot, intimidated, disheartened. The list goes on, but as soon as you start making truths, they reflect the narrative and then they can be invoked mechanically. And this goes a long way towards solving that boring issue in combat in D&D where I want to make an attack roll. I just make an attack roll. Oh, I hit. I don't hit. And now it's not my turn anymore. Like, cool. But in this, it's like, I want to go and attack. Okay, that's a fight. What exactly are you doing? Oh, I want to punch him in the face. That's fighting boldly. They look at their sheet and they're like, oh, I don't do so good at boldly. I'm really, really good at cleverly. Then how would you fight him cleverly? Oh, I want to go up and kick him in the balls and make him crumple over so I can have an easier time fighting him in the future. I say, excellent, fighting cleverly. Go ahead and roll it. Now, if they succeed, they get to do a little unarmed damage from kicking them in the balls. And then they also get to spend 2 momentum to put the ball-shotted truth on the guy. And that whole time, the enemy, too, is rolling against them, trying to gain an advantage over them in battle as well. And that back and forth intricate dance of placing truths on the environment or on a character that benefit you while also removing truths on the environment or on yourself that are a detriment to you, that sort of dance means that the GM basically feels just like another player. And it is one of the most fun experiences that I've had in combat in basically any TTRPG. It's more fun than Cyberpunk. It's been more fun than D&D. It's been more fun than the Fallout RPG. It's been really reactive and really diverse. And most importantly, quick. Because in this system, you can fight 10, 15 people and a combat lasts 5-10 minutes. And so there are some more intricacies when it comes to the combat system that I don't want to spoil everything. I do want you guys to actually check this out for yourself. So when you do pick up the book, you guys can be surprised. And so that's going to take us into the magic, which comes in 2 forms in this game. You have either your powers or your Bonecharms. There's 2 types of Bonecharms, common Bonecharms and enhanced Bonecharms. Common Bonecharms are going to give you like a boost or a boon that's relatively passive, where black Bonecharms give you more notable abilities, or even sometimes abilities that are more akin to having a full power, really. And then, of course, the powers are this game's versions of spells. These spells are much more overt, and are a definite physical manifestation of the outside or that sort of dark place where magic comes from. These powers are all pretty good, actually, and all pretty useful. I actually really like all of them a lot, even though all of them are not for combat. Some of them add so much narrative flavor that they're just like ridiculous, like Glimpse Hollows. That is such a cool ability. Now, the Bonecharms, too, are very useful and really cool, especially as a fan of the games. However, as a fan of the games, I can say that there are some very notable powers missing here. And on the whole, I think that the Bonecharms in this section could be a little bit more robust. What they provide, though, is very, very cool. And I would keep in mind, too, that Dishonored is a low magic setting. It's supposed to be. And that this is a TTRPG. So unlike the video games, where Corvo has 20 powers and like 5 million Bonecharms, if you try to give your players any more than like 6 or 7 powers, like 3 or 4 Bonecharms amongst the entire group, 4 players, then it is going to quickly unbalance your game, and it's going to be basically impossible to challenge them without always hitting them too with magical enemies, you know, like these super strong witches and stuff. So for long campaigns, I actually suggest basically never awarding magic items unless the player is playing a character that is intentionally looking for those things. So if they go looking for them, then they can find shrines, they can find runes and things like that. But just getting lucky and coming across it, I would almost never do that. And in order to make it extra sweet, I would use some of the homebrewing rules in this game, because this game has a pretty open mindset about letting players homebrew their own powers and their own Bonecharms, quite frankly. And it even provides, the Game Master's Kit provides some loose rules for how to do that as well. So if you're not ever awarding these powers and they're having to go out and find them, then when they do find them, allowing them to then tweak and kind of custom make the ability that they really want, that they've been working for this whole time, that's really gonna seal the deal and keep them from feeling like you're just being stingy for the sake of being stingy. With this, you know, even being able to homebrew your own powers, this just breaks the game and character customization wide open. Yet again, you can level up however you want as a player, and you even get to homebrew your own magic powers. Simply put, yeah, you got total creation, total customization, so long as you and the GM are on the same accord. And that collaboration that's literally written into the rules, encouraging game masters to let their players build, that greases the wheels and makes playing so much easier, and I love it. Now let's talk a little bit about what this game is lacking. We're going to talk about one of his weaknesses, sandwich that into one of his strengths. The next thing is exploration, okay? I don't know what it is about games and exploration, but this, just like D&D, doesn't really have any sort of system for traveling over land. Now, I think that might be because this book is based basically on a game that doesn't have an open world. Dishonored is a mission-based video game, so there is no traveling in that game. But even still, I think that if you want people to play your game for a long time, then it needs to have travel mechanics so that they can get from point A to point B. However, I would say that the DMG 2024 does add some travel mechanics, different terrains, how long it takes you to travel, DCs for foraging and all of that kind of stuff. I actually still think that system's pretty lackluster as well, but it's better than what we had in 2014, that's for sure. However, most games tend to leave a lot desired when it comes to travel systems, to me. And I've played a whole bunch of different games. The one with the most built out one so far I think I've played is the Fallout RPG. And again, it too is just okay. Now, Dishonored does use another system called progress tracks. And these can be used in literally any situation. Even if you don't play this game, I actually would take this idea and run with it. I love progress tracks. I use them in basically everything. So check this out. Progress tracks are a number of boxes that you check off. Like different types, you know. There's stealth, there's intrigue, there's stress, where you run out, you die. And then there's mana, which you need to use your powers. Now, I've been using the progress tracks in my own game to try to simulate journey. And so this is what I've been doing. It's kind of a placeholder system to like come up with something more robust. But right now what I've been doing is making a certain number of boxes for how difficult I think that the travel will be. 3 boxes, 5 boxes, 7 boxes, whatever. And every roll that they make is a day of travel. Because you can get multiple successes and you can tick off extra progress with more successes, it allows them to simulate, okay, every roll is a day, so they rolled once, they rolled twice, they rolled 3 times. It took them 3 times to fill up this progress track of 7 boxes. That means that this trip took 3 days for them to do. And then any natural 20s that they roll are just complications. And those complications present themselves as travel encounters, which may not always be negative. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But overall, I have to say, I am underwhelmed by the travel mechanics in most games, and this game is no different. Sidebar. For all you would-be game designers out there, from somebody who runs thousands of hours of game, I would say if you want people to play your game for any length of time, then there needs to be a mechanical way in your game for the players to move from point A to point B, both close distances, medium, and potentially even far if you're going to have a game that's like fantasy like D&D and there's like plane travel and stuff like that. Leaving that all up to the DM's interpretation is frankly a dick move, because it's hard enough to run TTRPGs already to begin with without the GM having to worry about, how long or how far away something is, or, come up with these things. Having that information presented for you is one thing, but having to fabricate it on top of the world building, making the NPCs, making the combat encounters, it's just another thing and is a hassle. And I really do wish games would start designing themselves with full travel systems already intact. But that's just okay. So social encounters, that's where I left off at before I got sidetracked. Social encounters in this game have 2 different modes. They have like an intrigue mode, and then they have normal mode. Normal mode is basically like D&D. You roll a check. Did you get enough successes? You pass or you fail. This game also offers the option to succeed at cost. So if you fail, you can still push it and succeed, but with the complication chosen by the GM. So I love that too, because that means that the players will never really fail. They're only ever choosing when and when not it makes tactical sense to make the situation work worse for themselves. They're always choosing essentially which failures to take, which is kind of cool. Now the second mode that it offers is Intrigue, which is sort of 2 people having a debate and going back and forth. Now, this book doesn't actually give specifics on how to rule battles of intrigue, but this is what I do. In a debate, intrigue tracks are equal to your talk skill. Both sides in a debate can then use whatever skills and styles that they want, even fighting or survival or move, whatever, albeit these all symbolize what they're doing with their words in an intrigue battle. Every time one side succeeds, the other side takes 1 damage to their intrigue. However, the character can spend 1, 3, or 6 momentum, or chaos, to deal another 1 to 3 damage in addition. This simulates the feeling of essentially one side making a great point and shifting the debate largely in their favor. When intrigue reaches 0 for either side, this signifies that one side has lost the argument or one side has won, and the narrative consequences that stem from that are then played out per the GM's purview. So perhaps the crowd turns on the Duke, after the players point out how much of a hypocrite they are. Perhaps, you talk a Baron into outing themselves as a fraud in front of the whole court. In this way, fighting with words can be as effective, if not more effective even, for characters who have a high talk skill. And then you may find at your table that talking quickly becomes a default option just because of how deadly combat is. This game also provides a way to track contacts and your relationship statuses, your social status, even like how much money you make and what profession you're likely to have. You can find that in the Game Master's Kit. This also provides a full list of all of the factions in the Dishonored universe, their ranking structures within those factions, and the perks that you get as a player as you climb up each one of those ranks. The system is literally completely equipped to run an all-political campaign with basically no combat, but with all of the battles being battles of intrigue. And even just looking at the focuses that the book provides, it even wants this to be an option. Look at this: counsel, deceive, etiquette here, society, persuade, negotiate. Yeah, so you have so many tools at your disposal to be just a smooth talker who makes your way through the campaign just by knowing what to say. But now, my pretties, for the maths that I've been talking to you about and how they compare to the D20 system. Boy, this took a lot of work. I practically melted my mind to learn this stuff. But if you like that, if you like these sort of nerdy deep dive gaming videos, and if you want to help me keep coming out with dope gaming content like this in the future, then please support the Patreon. It is crucial. It's only because of the patrons that I've even been able to get this little setup going. It looks nice back here. It's not a lot, but I'm still incredibly humbled by it and thankful for it. So thank you to my patrons who continue to support. We are a small, humble community. We're growing quickly, but we're spreading positivity and fun in a world that is severely lacking it. And it's actually because of that I think we are growing so quickly. So if that sounds like your jam, then please do join our team. I release a small amount of patron content every month just to say thank you. I'll also shout you out on the video, and you get a chance to talk to me behind the scenes and kind of determine the kind of videos that I'll be coming out with and the content I'll be working on next. I plan on doing even more in the future for our patrons, but of course, we gotta hit those goals before then. So I did some sleuthing over the interwebs, and I read a bunch of formulas. I was going to use a blackboard today, but I decided there was no way that I could practically show these equations. So I did manage to find a chart, and this is what I'm going to be using. So if you look at your screen, at the very, very top, the 2D20, 3D20, 40D20 in bold, that's how many dice are being thrown. Under that, you're going to see the word successes. And in that column on the left, on the far left side, that's going to show you how many successes that you'll get given the odds of the dice that you're throwing. At the top of each column, you're going to also see numbers 8 through 16. That is your target number. So if I were to roll 2d20 with the target number of 8, the chances that I would get no successes is 36%. The chance that I would get at least one success is 64%. So that's still the highest chance, and I'm more than likely going to roll at least one success, even if my target number is as low as it could possibly be. And that's why you want to be boosting your styles and your skills as you level up. But then let's talk about our chances of complications, because just like in D&D, when you roll a nat 1, got a critical failure. In this game, the opposite is true. Rolling low is good in this game, so rolling a natural 20 is a critical failure in this game. But as you've noticed, you're rolling 2 dice. So what actually are the chances, the odds of rolling a complication with 2d20? Well, actually, it's quite simple. It's only about a 10% chance. A 9.8% chance to be exact, which means that every time you throw the dice, there's a 1 in 10 chance that you suffer a complication. And these are about the same odds that you'll find in a game like Cyberpunk, where it's a 1 in 10 chance of rolling a critical failure. Now, the cool thing about this is the way that the focuses work in relation to this, because let's look at our any dice here. You can see that we have count 1.8, that means a count of 1 through 8, and then the next number after that is 1. That is going to be our critical range. And that is what a focus is. It is a secondary critical range. So this is our default, just showing the 1 to 8 and the 1 right here. However, as this second number increases, and this second number represents our focus, as our focus increases, you're going to start to see how the odds of getting more successes goes up. Because remember, if your D20 matches both your target number and your focus, then you get an extra success. And so now, even with our focus as a 5, which is the highest that it can be, now if we're going to get any successes at all, we're more likely to get 2 than to get 1. And so just like in D&D, of course, the things you're proficient at, those are the things you're going to want to roll. The things you have focuses in, those are the things you're going to want to roll. And you can see that your focus doesn't increase your odd of having 0 successes. It just increases your odd of having multiple successes if you get successes at all. And so, as I showed you earlier, you can spend momentum to buy extra dice, right? But then doesn't that mean that your chances of rolling a natural 20 go up? Because in this game, there is no advantage. There isn't like, you roll 2d20 and take the highest. You just roll more dice. And if they roll complications, then they roll complications. In this game, it's possible to succeed and still roll complications, in which case you succeed, but something goes wrong in the process. But from my math, complications are at about 10% for every single check you make, because you roll a minimum of 2 dice for every single roll. However, if we switch it to 3d20, it only rises by 3.5% to 13.5%. So essentially, throwing one more die increases your chance of complication by 3%. But when we look at how much throwing an extra die increases your chances of success, as soon as we go from this 2d20 chart to this 3d20 chart, look at what happens to our odds. As soon as you go up in dice, especially the lower your target number is, you get as much as a 14% increase, while you're only increasing your chances of complication by 3%. So in other words, use that momentum. It's the key to success. You should basically always be throwing 3 dice if possible, because the amount that it increases your complications is far eclipsed by the amount that is going to raise your chances of success. Now, one thing that my math can't really account for are the truths. because they add or subtract successes directly. But they are one way that the player can sort of game the system and break the curve, so to speak, which is a good thing. But there is no understating, okay? I can't say this enough. There's no understating how powerful the truths are. Personal truths are potentially a boon for the character whenever they use any particular skill or any particular weapon. Depending on how that truth is worded, it can apply in an infinite number of situations. However, a lot of truths can also severely hinder the party. And in the late game, it's actually crucial to limit the truths, because by that point, the party will have all kinds of spells, talents, equipment, magic items that are capable of inflicting truths on the world and those in it. So be careful as a GM. Also, once truths start to stack, it can really cause the difficulty to balloon. Making mistakes, as a game master in the system, I once had a difficulty of 10 on something, just adding all the different truths that I had stacked up on top of it. And the player still hit the shot. I mean, they used more truths. They used Bonecharms to counteract it. They used magic. They used their own powers. They used a custom rifle that they made and spent all their momentum to roll 5 dice. And voila. So as a GM, your players are very, very capable all on their own and will not need you to give them more power on top of that. So just try to keep the truths in check, especially if you're running a long-term campaign, because they start to accumulate. All in all, though, I think the truths are the best thing about the system. They literally make the narrative a mechanic, which is beautiful. But even just looking at the charts for this math, one is obviously more interesting to look at, and it's funny how this translates into play. If you want to see how fun a game mechanics might be, take a look at its curves. Take a look at its smooth, nice curves. If you like what you see, you'll probably have fun in that game. So while D&D is simpler under the hood, my verdict is that it's a much more complex game on the surface, which makes it harder for new players to break in. It's also harder for new game masters to break in, and that's perhaps more important because they're needed to run the game. It's also got so much content, especially now that it's doing this whole backward compatibility thing with both editions. It's got so much content that 5e is barely even compatible with 5e. So this game, on the other hand, has much more complex math going on under the hood, but its systems on the surface, way more streamlined, way more sleek. A simple interface makes it very easy to onboard new players, and it's simple enough with its concepts that players can play without actually really needing to concern themselves with the bonuses or anything like that. They don't need to know, oh, well, what does my proficiency bonus apply to and all this. They don't need to know any of that stuff. They just describe what they're going to do, roll their dice. Does it equal your target number? Does it equal your focus? Then it's 2 successes. That's that. Now, I do have some of my own specialty rules, and like I said, those mechanics I'm going to be sharing with my patrons, so do jump on the Patreon if you are interested in seeing that kind of stuff. But I like that the mechanics and all of the systems in this game point back to the narrative. The players never really need to concern themselves with anything more than the narrative. What truths are on the scene? When you're attacking, fighting, talking, how are you doing those things? That's going to be your mechanics. What focuses are you using? Because the player chooses the focuses that they want to use. They even get to make up their own focuses. And so each mechanic serves to fold back into the narrative, which makes this a very immersive experience. Now for the cons. Now for what I don't like about this game. Frankly, my biggest critique about this is that there isn't more of it. It feels underdeveloped. It's a system that lacks content for long-term campaigns. It's simple though, and very, very easy to homebrew systems on top of this is why I still really recommend it. The effort that it takes to balance homebrew for Dishonored as opposed to D&D is like night and day. And when it comes to playing it right out of the box, you can play it right out of the box. I run this at convention with people who have never even picked up dice to roleplay before, and it is intuitive even for them, and they have a blast. So for people who know what they're doing, I mean, that's just fun waiting to be had. Now Dishonored, unfortunately kind of got cut loose in its game development. Arcane Studios is not working on Dishonored anymore, so some of the content that might have been here simply just isn't, and that's a shame. But that's why these smaller game studios need our funding, right? That's why these smaller game studios like Modiphius should be the people that we buy our stuff from, because then they can go on to making not just excellent games, but then going on to make expansions for those games, extra books, you know, campaign books, that kind of thing, which unfortunately we're probably never going to see for this. But don't let that discourage you from picking up a copy and really giving it a try. It is a 2 thumbs up from me. And so these are my reviews of this game. Given everything that I've talked about, I've been showing them on your screen now. If you want to play this wonderful game with me, then look no further than Start Playing Games, where you can find me on my profile running games every single day. I'm actually about to head to a game right now. I run a whole host of games, of course, including the Dishonored RPG, but literally everything else that you see on the shelf behind me, if you can see, all of that, I run all of that, and I actually have more books that I run, but they're all PDFs. I would love to own them as hardcovers one day, but, you know, got to put gas in the tank and food in the baby's mouth. However, on that note, if you want to support the Patreon, that would go a long way towards showing me that you like this kind of content and that I should keep coming out with this kind of content, because that's always up in the air. Trends change, fads change. Your likes, your subscribes, your joining the Patreon are what sort of help me know if I'm headed in the right direction or not, if that makes sense. But that ends today's episode of Encounter, and Brewmaster recommends the Dishonored RPG. I will see all of you in the next one.